Martha Wilkins stood barely 5 feet tall, her silver hair always perfectly coiffed in a gentle bun, her floral dresses pressed and proper as she moved about the expansive boarding house that had been in her family for generations. The Willow Creek Manor was an impressive Victorian structure with ornate gingerbread trim and wide, welcoming porches sitting on 3 acres of meticulously maintained gardens just outside the limits of Millfield, population 2,307. Martha's reputation in town was impeccable. She organized the food pantry at First Baptist Church, delivered meals to shut-ins every Wednesday, and hosted an annual Christmas party where the entire town was welcome. Her boarding house rates were reasonable, her rooms clean, and her home-cooked meals legendary. No one questioned when, after her husband Harold's passing 15 years prior, her middle-aged son Calvin moved back home to help mother maintain the property. Calvin was odd, quiet, watchful, with a tendency to stare a beat too long, but the arrangement seemed practical for a widow approaching her twilight years. The spring air was crisp and carried the scent of Martha's famous lilac bushes when Gerald Pritchett, a traveling salesman who'd stayed at the Willow Creek Manor for 3 nights, drove himself to Millfield General Hospital. The doctors noted his symptoms with growing concern: severe abdominal cramping, vomiting, diarrhea, and progressive weakness. "It must have been something I ate," Gerald kept insisting between bouts of pain. Martha's beef stew tasted strange, but I didn't want to offend her. Despite aggressive treatment, Gerald's condition deteriorated rapidly, his organs shutting down one by one while the medical team worked frantically to stabilize him. When Gerald Pritchett took his final, shuddering breath 36 hours after admission, Dr. Elaine Chen ordered a comprehensive toxicology panel, something unusual for their small-town facility but warranted by the rapid and unexplained decline of an otherwise healthy 65-year-old man. The laboratory results arrived 3 days later, marked urgent in bold red letters across the top of the report. Dr. Chen's hands trembled slightly as she read the findings: significant levels of arsenic compounds and ethylene glycol, the main ingredient in antifreeze, present in Gerald Pritchett's blood, tissue, and stomach contents. The hospital administration contacted Sheriff Wade Monroe immediately, their hushed conference in the hospital boardroom ending with the sheriff making several grim phone calls to the county prosecutor and state police. By nightfall, a search warrant had been issued for Willow Creek Manor, with special attention to the kitchen, food storage areas, and any chemical storage on the property. The following morning, Sheriff Monroe and 4 deputies approached the boarding house just after breakfast service, when Martha was typically cleaning up and preparing for the day ahead. Martha greeted them with genuine warmth, offering coffee and her fresh-baked cinnamon rolls even as Sheriff Monroe, his voice strained, presented the search warrant. "Why, of course you can look around," Martha said cheerfully, wiping her hands on her apron. "Though I can't imagine what you're searching for. Is everything all right, Wade? I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper." The sheriff, unable to meet her gaze, instructed his deputies to begin their systematic search of the sprawling house while he interviewed the current boarders, 3 traveling businessmen and an elderly couple staying while their new retirement condo was being completed. It was Deputy Lisa Hernandez who first noticed the odor as the search team worked their way through the first floor, a subtle but unmistakable scent of decay emanating from behind the door to the basement. Martha explained it away as probably a raccoon that got trapped down there last week. Calvin's been meaning to find the poor thing. The basement door was locked, requiring Martha to retrieve a large iron key from her apron pocket. As the door swung open, the smell intensified, causing the officers to recoil and hastily don their protective masks. The concrete stairs leading down were spotlessly clean, almost clinically so, in stark contrast to the musty space they expected. At the bottom of the stairs, the basement opened into a larger area than anticipated, with several doors leading to separate rooms. The first room contained nothing but neatly stacked preserves and canned goods. The second held gardening supplies and seasonal decorations. It was behind the third door that Deputy Mark Wilson discovered the first body, wrapped meticulously in heavy-duty plastic and duct tape, lying on a makeshift embalming table with drainage channels carved into the surface. 2 more bodies were found in the adjoining room, similarly wrapped but placed on shelving units as if awaiting some final disposition. The basement had been converted into a macabre processing facility, with industrial-grade ventilation systems that directed most odors through underground pipes that vented far from the house. The scene was so methodically organized that it momentarily stunned the experienced officers. This was not the chaotic crime scene of passion or desperation, but the workspace of someone who had developed a system over time, refining their process with practiced precision. In a locked cabinet in the corner of the room, Deputy Hernandez discovered the chemical evidence they needed: professionally labeled containers of arsenic compounds, strychnine, potassium cyanide, and several gallons of antifreeze, alongside meticulously maintained notebooks documenting treatments and transitions with dates, names, and chemical formulations. Martha and Calvin were separated and taken into custody, their Miranda rights read as stunned boarders and neighbors gathered on the street to watch. Calvin went quietly, his eyes downcast and his wrists offered willingly for the handcuffs. Martha, however, appeared genuinely confused by the proceedings. "This is all a misunderstanding," she insisted as she was being led to the police cruiser, her voice carrying across the gathering crowd. "I take care of people, that's what I've always done. Everyone who stays with me is family." The investigation was just beginning, however, and Sheriff Monroe requested additional resources from the state, including cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar equipment to examine the extensive grounds surrounding the property. Over the next 2 weeks, the picturesque gardens of Willow Creek Manor were methodically transformed into a grid-marked excavation site as forensic teams worked around the clock. The initial findings from the ground-penetrating radar showed dozens of anomalies consistent with burial sites scattered across the property, some appearing to date back decades based on their soil compaction and depth. The first excavation revealed human remains approximately 5 feet below the surface, carefully wrapped in plastic and canvas, with obvious signs of chemical preservation. By the end of the first week, 17 bodies had been recovered. By the end of the second week, the count had reached 73. When the final tally was announced at a somber press conference held by state authorities, the number stood at 118 victims, 115 exhumed from the property plus the 3 discovered in the basement, making Martha Wilkins one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. Throughout the investigation, Martha maintained her peculiar serenity, cooperating with investigators and offering detailed information about her guests when shown photographs or given names. Her confession, when it finally came in a sterile interview room at the county jail, was delivered with the same warm, grandmotherly demeanor with which she had served her famous apple pie. "You misunderstand the nature of my work," she explained patiently to the seasoned FBI profiler who had been brought in for the case. "These people were suffering, some physically, yes, but most of them spiritually. They were lost souls who found their way to my door because the Lord guided them there for healing. I simply helped them transition to the next phase of their journey." When pressed about the method of healing, Martha described a process of careful observation to identify those guests who were ready for transition, followed by gradual poisoning tailored to each individual's constitution, explaining with disturbing clarity how she had refined her techniques over the decades to ensure her guests experienced minimal discomfort during the passage. Martha's trial became a national sensation, with media outlets descending upon Millfield in droves, turning the quiet town into a circus of satellite trucks and reporters. Forensic experts testified about the meticulous record-keeping that allowed them to identify most victims and determine that the killings spanned over 40 years. Calvin's role became clearer through testimony. He had been his mother's faithful assistant, disposing of bodies, maintaining the basement facilities, and procuring chemicals through his job as a purchasing manager at a regional agricultural supply company. Martha sat through the proceedings with an expression of polite interest, as if attending a mildly engaging lecture rather than her own murder trial. When asked if she wished to address the court before sentencing, Martha stood with dignity, smoothed her prison-issued uniform, and spoke with conviction. "These people are not dead. None of them are dead. They have merely transitioned to their true home, and I helped them find their way. One day, you will understand the mercy in what I've done. I hope you find peace with it, as I have." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts for both Martha and Calvin Wilkins. Calvin, who had remained mostly silent throughout the proceedings except to occasionally nod in agreement with his mother's statements, received the death penalty for his role in the decades-long killing spree. Martha, due to her advanced age of 80, was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole, a sentence that elicited the first genuine emotion she had shown during the trial, disappointment. "I had hoped to continue my ministry," she told the judge softly. "There are so many more lost souls who need guidance to the other side." The town of Millfield would never be the same after the horrors of Willow Creek Manor came to light. Community forums were held to help residents process their shock and grief. Many had eaten Martha's cooking at church functions, had sent their out-of-town relatives to stay at her boarding house, had trusted this woman implicitly for decades. The question that haunted them all was how they had failed to see the monster behind the kind, wrinkled face. Local businesses suffered as the town became known only for its connection to the boarding house butcher, as the tabloids had dubbed Martha. The boarding house itself was eventually demolished after being purchased by the county, the land converted into a memorial park for the victims, though few locals ever visited, preferring to take the long way around town to avoid confronting the sight of such unimaginable evil. Martha Wilkins, now in her mid-90s, remains incarcerated at the state's maximum security women's correctional facility. Despite her crimes, she has become something of a model prisoner, organizing a Sunday school class, knitting blankets for the prison nursery, and offering counsel to younger inmates. Prison staff report that she retains her cheerful disposition and grandmother-like warmth, though they strictly monitor her access to any kitchen facilities or chemical substances. Most disturbing to those who guard her is Martha's unwavering belief in the righteousness of her actions and her apparent lack of remorse. She teaches Bible verses about eternal life with genuine conviction, one guard noted in a documentary about the case, but sometimes I catch her watching the younger, more troubled inmates with this calculating look, like she's identifying who might need her special brand of help next. Prison psychologists continue to debate whether Martha suffers from a unique form of delusional disorder or represents a perfectly lucid evil hidden behind a facade of maternal concern, while Martha herself maintains that she is merely waiting patiently for her own transition, at which point she expects to be reunited with all those she helped cross over, in a place where they will thank her for releasing them from their earthly suffering. What continues to send chills down the spines of investigators, criminologists, and anyone familiar with the case is not just the staggering body count or the methodical nature of the killings, but the absolute conviction in Martha's eyes when she speaks of her victims awaiting her in some better place, the unsettling thought that somewhere in that frail, grandmotherly body resides a mind so twisted that it genuinely perceives mass murder as an act of profound love and mercy. More terrifying still is the question that keeps many in Millfield awake at night. If someone as seemingly kind and nurturing as Martha Wilkins could harbor such darkness, what monstrous potential might lurk behind any smile, any act of generosity, any outstretched helping hand? The true horror of Martha Wilkins isn't just what she did, it's that she makes us question whether we can ever truly know anyone at all.